With this lecture, I want to give you some an overview and some background to Citizen Kane to think about what to look for, and after you watch it, you kind of come back and kind of return to some of these thoughts to reconsider. Citizen Kane is generally considered one of the best films of all time, and I want you to think about why that is, right? Why do people use this film as kind of the pinnacle of cinema? And in connection with our previous discussion on the rise of film, here you see two images, one from George Méliès's Trip to the Moon and then Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. What we see within Citizen Kane's part of what makes this film so great, something to look into, is that whereas with the older kind of previous style of films, we just saw the camera that's pretty static and just recording information as though there was just a play going on and someone like a parent in the audience is just kind of recording the actors kind of going through the performance. What we see with Citizen Kane is that Orson Welles starts to systematize a style of telling information, and the information is just more than the dialogue. It's more than what the actors are doing as they're acting out their parts. It's about how to construct a shot, how to construct the camera, how the camera can convey information, how different editing techniques can start to convey different parts of information in order to convey meaning. And so, in some ways, the director starts to use film as a way of telling a story in multiple ways. And so what I want you to think about as we go through the film is this idea of piecing together the information, paying attention to the shots, and thinking about what each shot means. We've talked about before within masterpieces of literature or masterpieces of music or art, there are no accidents, right? That there are very conscious choices being made, and so we have to, rather than just watching a film like we normally do with popcorn and kind of zoning out. I want you to pay attention to the elements. Why did Orson Welles choose this specific shot? Why did he choose to make the camera lower or higher? Or why did he choose this editing technique in order to convey this information, right? So, what does that mean on the overall idea of the film? And as we start to think about meaning, we have to piece together these elements. And so, what we see within Citizen Kane is it's really like a jigsaw puzzle where you have to piece together information as they delve into the life of Charles Foster Kane. They have to then start to dig deeper into his background, and then we're invited to dig deeper in the background. And if we only really listen to the dialogue and listen to what the actors are doing, we only get a kind of a surface level understanding. But if we start to pay attention more to the subtle film techniques within the film, to kind of pay attention to that narrative as well, we get a whole new level of meaning. And this is why Citizen Kane becomes extremely important, is it has that multi-layer ability to tell a story. I wanted to just show you two scenes in particular that demonstrate this, and this will help you as you watch the film to be able to know more of what to look for. This is going to be the introduction of the film, and I'll just kind of talk through it as we go to get you to think about some elements to pay attention to. So we first have to start thinking about music, and this shot here is no trespassing. You see a fence. So no trespassing means that someone's putting up a barrier. They're trying to be private. They're trying to not allow people into their space, right? So as we think about that as a kind of a metaphor for Charles Kane, how is he setting up what elements, what barricades is he setting up in his life to make sure that people don't understand him, right? And that's part of the process of what Thompson is doing. What we also see within this is a series of editing techniques called dissolves, and a dissolve is when one shot is replaced, it kind of fades out, another shot takes its place. But the screen never really goes completely black, and so it's just constantly fading in and out. And what we've seen at the very beginning, if I could just kind of go back here just for a minute, as we take a look at the fences, we see a series of match dissolves. Match dissolves are things that dissolve, but there's going to be a common motif, something that's similar. And so it dissolves to another fence, to another fence, to another fence. And so these are all the barriers that Charles Kane is putting up in his life to make sure that people are not going to know who he is, because he's kind of isolated and he's guarded, right? Now we as the audience are invited in to try to find out who this person really is. Then we see a series of match dissolves here that we're going to see is that the similarity is not going to be a fence. Instead, it's going to be the light on in Charles's mansion, Xanadu here. And we're going to see just kind of series of just dissolves, dissolve, dissolve that gets us closer and closer. And so Orson Welles here is allowing us into this private space where we're not supposed to be, to give us an intimate insight into who this person is. And the question that he's going to leave us with is, can you ever really know who a person is? Can you really ever have enough information to truly capture the life, to summarize the life of who a person is? And so we notice that light on the window, and it gets bigger and bigger as we get closer and closer to Charles Kane. So this is the desire, this is kind of the objective of the audience, is to kind of get closer and closer to his kind of personal background and to his insight. Then we see an extreme close-up here. It's extreme close-up. Just stopping this is when one small object fills the entire screen, and it's a way of, that's generally not how we see the world. We just don't go around like standing this close, or how, within a couple of inches of any particular thing. And anytime that the camera does something that's different from the natural way that we see the world, it's a way for a director to underscore a specific moment. And so as we see this extreme close-up, we see a cottage here in a globe. Then we see another close-up of Charles Kane's lips here. So we see a connection, right? As we think about films, right, there's something called the Kuleshov effect. And the Kuleshov effect suggests that when we see two subsequent shots, we derive meaning from them, right? Kind of unconsciously, without even really thinking about it. And one example of the Kuleshov effect is anytime you see, you're watching a TV show or a movie, and they show the exterior of, say, a cafe. They show you the outside of the cafe, and then they show you inside with two people talking in a booth. The mind, right, the Kuleshov effect suggests that those two shots, the outside of the cafe and then seeing inside the actors sitting down at a table, our mind automatically puts together that these two people are at a cafe, rather than the reality is that these two people are actually in a studio on some type of sound lot somewhere on Warner Brothers or Paramount or wherever within their studio. And so the idea is that two sequential shots we will derive meaning from. And so as we think about the globe, right, that little house, the snow, the globe that he's holding, and then the last words that he says is Rosebud. And so again, this is extreme close-up, so it's highlighting this specific moment. This is what Orson Welles wants to underscore, and this is what's going to be driving the rest of the film, is why in the world this was his last statement, right? And then the nurse comes in, sees that he's dead. What's kind of interesting to me about this is it doesn't appear that there's anyone in the room that actually hears Rosebud, which kind of is an interesting way that the rest of the film is trying to understand what that means. But I question whether anyone actually even heard it, right? Or where they did hear it from. I wanted to show you one last scene, and then I promised to stop talking. This is delving into Charles's past. So again, much like what we see with the introductory shot where we're kind of going into his life and going beyond the fences and getting closer and closer to that light in the window, that's kind of a metaphor for what we're doing as we delve into his past and try to understand who he actually is. And so this is going back to Charles when he was a child. We see the snow, we see the sled kind of playing at this boarding house. And then we see his mother and father. And this is kind of an interesting shot because Orson Welles chooses to shoot this shot within what is known as a deep focus. A deep focus is when the foreground and the background are in focus at the same time. What that does is it makes the audience have to pay attention to what's going on in the foreground and the background because they're equally important. So as we think about that, as we watch this scene, we have to realize that Charles is in the background while his mother is in the foreground and what happens, right?
Yes.
And this might give us some insight into what's going on with Charles Kane's life.
You people seem to forget that I'm the boy's father.
It's going to be done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to. A boarder that beats his bill and leaves worthless stock behind. That property is just as much my property as anybody's, now that it's valuable. And if Fred Graves had any idea all this was going to happen, he'd have made out those certificates in both our names.
However, they were made out in Mrs. Kane's name.
He owed the money for the board to the both of us.
The bank's decision on all matters
I
concerning...
don't hold with signing my boy away to any bank as guardian.
I want you to
just
stop
because.
all this nonsense,
The bank's
Jim.
decision on all matters concerning his education, his places of residence, and similar subjects is to be
The
final.
idea of a bank being the guardian.
I want you to stop all this nonsense, Jim.
We will assume full management of the Colorado load, of which I repeat, Mrs. Kane, you are the sole owner.
Where do I sign, Mr. Thatcher?
Right here, Mrs. Kane.
Mary, I'm asking you for the last time. Anybody'd think I hadn't been a good
The sum of
husband, a father.
$50,000 a year is to be paid to you and Mr. Kane as long as you both live, and thereafter to the survivor.
Well, let's hope it's all for the best.
It is.
And so what we see here, right, is as she's signing away Charles to Leland, that Leland's now going to raise him as this kind of heartless, cold banker, industrialist. And we can kind of think about ideas that we talked about during the Great Depression, the common man, and how wealthy can be a little bit cold and callous, and it's really the common man that's the pure essence of the American spirit. We can kind of think about those ideas in the background, but as we think about her signing her son over, and we have the son outside playing as an innocent boy would play, right? And he shouts, right? The one thing that he does shout is "Union forever," right? And this kind of connection between the father and the son, right? And then the mother kind of is this cold, distant figure. And so it's kind of interesting that she's kind of cold, and the closest one to Charles is, right, kind of standing here in the middle, kind of middle ground, is the father, which shows this kind of connection, and the mother's kind of distant. But what's also kind of interesting as we think about the actual shot here is that the mother is closer to the audience rather than Charles, who's so far away. And so then we have to think about how that plays out with our identity, that we are starting to see the world, or he's going to be seeing the world maybe through this kind of cold, heartless eyes. And then that's how we're going to then have to identify or start to see Charles as well. And so it's kind of interesting how they set this stage there as well. Just some food for thought as you guys consider this particular shot. It's the placement, why the characters are placed in
Go on, Mr. Thatcher.
And what's also interesting about this specific shot is notice that this is all one shot, right? They have not cut away since she went to the window, right? So this is about
Everything else, the principal as well as all monies earned, is to be administered
and then
by
it's
the
going to
bank
finally
in trust
break
for your
away
son Charles Foster Kane
with a
until he
close-up
reaches
of
his
her shouting
25th
Charles's
birthday,
name.
at which time he is to come into complete possession.
Charles!
So as we think about this, right, these are just two scenes that I want you to think about, that you can kind of start pulling together and think about the meaning, right? What's the meaning? Why is it that she's so much closer to the audience when she seems so cold and heartless? Why is it that Charles is in the background while all of this is happening? How might this be one piece in this overall jigsaw puzzle of Charles's life? So as you watch the film and you think about how Thompson is trying to understand what that word means, and he goes to Bernstein and Leland and Susan and the butler, and they're all trying to give them different pieces of information about Charles and his past. I want you to think about whether the information is useless or not, right? Sometimes Thompson is a little bit frustrated by the information that he receives, and so I want you to think about What does he conclude about the jigsaw puzzle of Charles Kane's life? And then what is the viewer to conclude about Charles Kane's life? And then what do you think the phrase rosebud truly means?